Welcome to The Backstory, a podcast from the North Dakota News Cooperative that takes an in-depth look at the stories we're reporting for you. I'm Sabrina Halvorson, CEO of the North Dakota News Cooperative. Joining me is Michael Standaert, our lead reporter. All right, Michael, so for this week it's going to be a little bit different because instead of talking strictly about a story that you've done, we're going to talk about one of the outcomes of a story that you collaborated on, and that outcome being that you are one of the people to be given an award for this. This is an award from the National Press Club, and it is for a story that you did in collaboration with some other reporters with FLOODLIGHT. So let's start off talking about what the story was.
So the story was I had started investigating these non-local newspapers that were showing up in people's mailboxes in Morton County. This was back in, I think, October last year when I started looking into this. The newspapers, the first one I saw was kind of titled Central ND News. Looked like they were being produced locally. But they were not. Most of the reporting was kind of mixed in national stories, more right-leaning stories. And then there was a middle section in the newspaper with these kind of odd flashback stories about the DAPL pipeline protests, the Dakota Access pipeline protests 8 years ago. And it was strange. So I first heard about this from more of the newspaper side, and people were concerned that this was made to look like a local paper, but it wasn't. So, I mean, all the papers here are, trying, a lot of the smaller papers are trying to survive. So there was a little concern about, okay, what is this newspaper, postmarked in Chicago that's showing up in mailboxes here? What is this paper about? So I started looking into that, and I don't know how much background I should go into. I mean, in the middle of that paper, there were several stories mostly about the pipeline protests. And there was a headline about a Canadian national facing 20 years in federal prison for sabotage against pipelines. There was a kind of a special section about this month in history, October 2016. And okay, why does a paper that all of a sudden shows up in this area have this section that is about 2016?
Yeah.
And it highlighted a story about local schools locked down because of the protests, different things. There was a story about Energy Transfer Partners, which is the company building the pipeline, story about their donations to the University of Mary. So it's like, okay, why is all this appearing now, flashing back to that period? It started to make some sense when you look at, so that they start to appear just a couple months before the trial against Greenpeace. So Energy Transfer had sued Greenpeace for the protests, and eventually Greenpeace lost that lawsuit just a couple months ago, and they're, have to pay $660 million, though they're appealing that. So it was kind of strange that this started to appear all of a sudden before this trial. And that's, what I started to look into. Maybe I should kind of go into how I connected with FLOODLIGHT.
Yeah, but before we do that, I have a couple of questions about this newspaper that showed up. Were the stories in it factual? Like, was the Canadian person actually arrested? And
yes, I mean, these were factual stories with a
okay.
right slant created by, I mean, often with no byline, so it's hard to figure out who's writing these.
But with a definite bias
With a
and
definite bias,
yeah.
and coming from a national source, it wasn't being produced locally, with a local North Dakota angle.
Wow. So this immediately sends up a lot of red flags to people who have some media literacy and who understand a bit about news. But for the average person, just getting this in their mailbox and start reading it, I can see whatever, and we'll get to this, we'll discuss this a little bit more too, but
Yeah.
yeah, the purpose behind this newspaper being sent out, it seems like it's very effective at matching that or meeting that purpose, even if the purpose is not, it has some ill intentions, we'll say.
Well, it's also hard to tell whether people took it seriously or not. I mean, people I
Hmm.
spoke with thought it was just weird, as our headline ended up being weird newspaper calls out pipeline protests 8 years later. Some people thought it was weird. Other people saw it and would, toss it away.
Right.
But, we don't really know how many people actually read it or looked at it or looked at those sections that were about pipelines and protests. But the obvious thing is, it painted any pipeline protests or any kind of people related to that as bad, and then Energy Transfer as good, as this kind of social champion in the local community, providing donations to a local university. So you have that kind of good and bad framework there.
So interesting.
Yeah.
So how did you then get connected with Floodlight to take this story bigger?
So I was looking into this Metric Media Group, which has produced these papers, and they produce them all over the country. They've been buying up local media outlets, and they end up often gutting the staffs and just kind of pushing through content that is, not byline, not produced locally. It's generated by their national people. So I had looked into some of the research about this Metric Media organization in the past, and I called up this journalist who is now with Bloomberg in London, but she was with the Toe Center of Digital Journalism at Columbia University in New York, and they had been investigating this Metric Media Group. And then she connected me with Floodlight because she knew that they had done some stories in the past and they were looking into this as well. And that's basically how that collaboration started. So I took more of the local side, doing a lot of the calls here locally, and then Miranda Green at Floodlight, she was doing more of the investigation into Metric Media, which she had done in the past, and kind of their connections to dark money and we didn't really know exactly where the money was coming from for this kind of pay to play distribution of news. I mean, it showed up. I think there were a couple times it came out in Morton County. It doesn't look like it really went too many places besides Morton County. So it looked like a directly targeted campaign. And then now, knowing that the trial with Greenpeace was in Morton County, it looks pretty obvious that somebody paid for this to be produced in and sent out at that time. Greenpeace, during the trial, they had raised this issue once it was reported as a potential for jury tampering. The judge did not necessarily agree with that. He was concerned, apparently, about these papers showing up, but he didn't think it was enough to. Greenpeace wanted to move the trial. He didn't think
Hmm.
it was enough to move the trial, which they eventually just kept in Morton County. So yeah,
But
that's
it does
how it came together. And
I do see how they could say this looks quite a bit like an attempt at jury tampering.
yes, I agree. I mean, but it's again, how do you measure the impact of what
Right.
that paper actually did? And then did people on the jury read that paper? Did that contribute to their views, or
Right.
were their views already there? I think there were a lot of people that were pretty upset with the protests in general.
Yeah.
Was the choice of Morton County to have the trial in the first place. It's not necessarily a neutral site. So, you could argue on the side of Greenpeace that this was not a neutral site to begin with. So I'm not sure how all that came together, but it's
And we should point out that the of that trial was the jury found that Greenpeace was at fault.
yes. So Greenpeace has been ordered to pay 660 million in damages to Energy Transfer. They've appealed that. We don't know if they'll have to pay it or pay it all of it. If they do have to pay all of it, the Greenpeace people say that could potentially bankrupt their U.S. operations. I mean, they have operations all over the world, but this could bankrupt their U.S. operations.
So that's kind of the backstory, which is what we're all about on this podcast, obviously. How did you get connected then with Floodlight? Tell us a little bit more about that relationship and how that reporting went, because there were several reporters who then came on this story.
So it was, I mean, Floodlight had been doing a series of stories about kind of media manipulation related to renewable energy coverage. And I didn't know that before I partnered with them. As I said, I had reached out to this Bloomberg reporter who had been at the Toe Center for Digital Journalism, and she had put me in touch with Miranda Green at Floodlight. Our story was this specific story. There's some other people on that award that were not involved in the story that we did. They were
Right.
involved in other stories in that series of stories related to kind of misinformation reporting. So I didn't work with any of those other reporters on this story. I just worked with Miranda Green and then the editor at Floodlight with, fact checking and cross-referencing a lot of things.
Yeah. So it was a series of stories all focusing on misinformation and media, and your story was included in that series, and therefore you were part of the award.
Yes.
All right. So, and this is not your first Award. It is the first award, I think, for the North Dakota News Cooperative because we're such a young organization, but it's very exciting for us. So, congratulations on your award and your
Thank
excellent
you.
reporting.
Congratulations to us. Yeah, the only other I think I mean, I was involved in a collaboration story when I was in China, looking at fentanyl networks that were producing chemicals that eventually become fentanyl. This was with this Forbidden Stories news group out of Europe. I mean, I collaborated with journalists in India, in Europe, in Mexico. So that was another. I think we got this Polk Award for that one, but I don't remember if I've gotten any other awards, but
When you're collaborating with other journalists, what's that feel like for you? Is it hard to do? Is it exciting to do? Do you swap information? What's that like?
I mean, on investigations, it is very exciting, and you kind of need a lot of brains to bounce things off of.
Hmm.
You want to kind of bounce ideas back and forth because you don't necessarily know if what you're looking at is the right way to do something, or there might be another way that's better, or you only have a certain amount of information that you can gather. It's very helpful to have a lot of people collaborating on something. This was a very enjoyable experience. I mean, Miranda did a lot of great work on the digging into that network itself, and looking into a lot of records and things like that. And it was good for me to be here locally. I could reach out to people to get comment and get their thoughts on what they were seeing, and understanding of what it was. And yeah, I think it worked out pretty well. And we got an award. So it looks like it worked out very well.
All right. So, can people still read that website or that article on our website?
Yes, that is a November 1st, 2024 story. Weird newspaper calls out pipeline protests 8 years later. So if you go to our site and just, put that in a search, it should come up.
So, I see this as just a great example of excellent reporting, a fantastic job on your part. Uh,
Thank you.
but reporting that really matters to the community because when things like this come up, especially, when I have my own personal battle against misinformation. So anytime I see misinformation like this, and this was very deliberate, if not misinformation, it was a very deliberate attempt at, setting opinions in a certain direction.
Yeah,
And
and a funny thing with this story too is that Central ND News, they came back to me and tried to get a quote from me. I had been trying to talk to they had a named reporter in like one story. I was trying to figure out, okay, is this a real person? Can I speak to this person? And I called different places. I emailed. No one responded until the story came out. The story came out, and then Central ND News, wrote to me saying, are you aware of Floodlight's funding and things like that? Floodlight does have a specific role looking into renewable energy. They tried to paint me as anti-fossil fuel, and I was like, well, no, I don't have a position, pro or con either of these, fossil fuels or renewables. It's obvious that this paper was put out to present just one side of a thing. So that's basically what we pointed out, and pointed out the network that was behind it. It's different if somebody is creating something and then just putting it out for a specific audience in one county than us, reporting on, various aspects of renewables, or fossil fuels, or things like that. So
right. And again, this county where this trial was about to take place, this newspaper presenting very one-sided view that will affect the trial directly to the people who will be participating as the jury in the trial.
yeah, I
So
think
that's all
people.
very questionable, and that's not what the news media does.
No. And I think people needed to know that this was happening and what was behind it.
Right.
If this paper was distributed to every county on a regular basis, there wouldn't really be a story here. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
But it shows up just a couple months before this trial in the county that the trial was going to be happening. So that's a pretty obvious targeted campaign. And then all the money behind Metric Media is coming through these political action committees and dark money that's hard to trace. So, it's different than, what they are trying to say is like, okay, Floodlight has its donors on its website, as does North Dakota News Cooperative. People can go and look at it.
Right.
You can't do that so easily with something like Metric Media unless you dig through a lot of different filings They don't list that stuff on their site. They were trying to paint it as a equal situation, but it's definitely not.
Yeah, absolutely, it's not. So fantastic job. And again, that all kind of goes to both parts of our mission. I like to tell people we have a two-parted mission. The first part is to bring quality news to North Dakota, and to help our other news agencies around the state with that as well. But then the other half being media literacy and helping our residents with media literacy. And this really went to both of those, because helping them see the purpose of this paper that arrived in their mailbox, and to see all of the bias and just how that was being used to manipulate, or could have been used to manipulate, I think goes to our media literacy
I mean,
mission as well.
yeah, no, I think it hit on both those fronts, and it's kind of sad to see something like this too, because so many newspapers that are trying to do a good job of reporting news objectively and factually, when this comes out, it looks kind of like what they're doing, but it's not what they're doing.
And yeah, and things like that can discredit all of the media. That's why so many
Yep.
people are losing trust in the media, is because things that are not actual news media are trying to present themselves as if they are, and it
Yeah.
gives us all a bad name.
Yep.
Good work, fantastic
Thank
work.
you.
Congratulations on the award, and I'm very excited, and we will continue doing this type of reporting as well.
Yes, definitely.
All right, I
So
think
if
we're
anybody
good.
has tips, you're always welcome to reach out. If you see something like this, see something that needs reporting, just, reach out. I'm increasingly having people reach out to share different tips, and it's always very helpful.
And if you'd like to email Michael a tip, you can reach him at michael@newscoopnd.org. You can read that story on our website at newscoopnd.org or in one of our local newspaper partners. For the North Dakota News Cooperative, I'm Sabrina Halvorson. This has been The Backstory.